content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families.
Tonight, we are mixing it up with the cauldron of crime and a potion of paranormal to bring you stories where the eerie meets the illegal. We're taking a stab at some unsolved mysteries and ghostly apparitions that might just give you the chills and maybe the chuckles. From ghouls who won't rest until justice is served to phantom felons making an otherworldly escape, this episode promises to bring a grave affair. So grab your detective hat and your EMF detector because we're about to embark on a spectacular adventure where crime and the creepy collide with our special guest, Gare Allen, and his book series, Ghost Crimes. It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. I'm your host, Winnie Schrader, and tonight I have a very special guest, Gare Allen, who was born and raised in Tampa, Florida, and still resides there. He has spent years studying metaphysical and the paranormal and has gained so much experience that he decided to write a book about people's experiences with the paranormal. But a lot of those stories involve real crimes. So I would like to introduce you to my very special guest, Gare Allen, with his book, Ghost Stories. Welcome to the show, Gare.
Hi, Winnie. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So you've been on my husband's show, obviously, because of the paranormal. But with me doing the true crime element, I love how when the paranormal and like reality and like crime meet, I think it's very interesting. We've actually had experiences with police officers. When we were moving over to this house, I love this story. Dave was still doing Midnight in the Desert, and we had everything moved over here. It was his last show over at the house. And all of a sudden he heard somebody walking around in the house. He thought somebody had broken in. So he called me and it's 2:00 in the morning. And he's like, "Are you over here?" I'm like, "No, we're in bed." It's 2:00 in the morning. And so he called the police. He hid in the closet and called the police. But the cops came and they did a full sweep of the house, couldn't find anything. They were standing up in the hallway. All of a sudden, the police officers started hearing footsteps. And they looked at Dave and said, "Yeah, let's get out of here." So it's pretty cool, and then he's also had stories of the law police officers loving the paranormal show, Darkness Radio, and their experiences that they've had. Weird experiences of going into a house and having unexplained things happen and things like that. So with your book, Ghost Stories, what did you like go around and did people give you stories? Where were these story sources coming from? Were they just people? Were they, psychic mediums? Where were you getting all the content for this book?
Well, I had written, several books about my own paranormal and metaphysical experiences. And I started to think, okay, there's so much that's going on out there. And I've always been a big X-Files fan. And I always remember, Spooky Mulder was the nickname given to the character because he believed that some of the crimes that were happening were paranormal or metaphysical or otherworldly. And everybody made fun of him for it. And that was many years ago, for those who are listening that know of the X-Files back in the late 90s, I guess, early 2000s. And I thought about it and I said, well, let me talk to some first responders and talk about some experiences. And it was also motivated. I had an experience in a hospital myself that was paranormal. So I said, okay. So I reached out and started talking to some of the first responders and, found out what their stories were. And it was interesting. Some of them were, well, I did have something happen, but I don't like to talk about it, or maybe they shared it, but they certainly didn't want to share their name, or they were terrified by what had happened, absolutely terrified. Or it was just more of a curious thing. And they're like, yeah, I still don't know how that could have happened. And so they're looking for answers, but everybody had a different take and response and reaction to the experiences. And what it started to think about it. And someone had explained a domestic abuse case or call where they showed up and one of the partners had been physically assaulted. They were visibly bruised. But they were both, the couple said, no, it wasn't either of us. Something invisible had done this. And, and they said, well, Gare, it wasn't a ghost crime. And I thought, well, first of all, thank you for that title, because that's amazing, because I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
But the point was, you can't blame invisible things. You can't blame the paranormal because everybody would be doing horrible things and blaming the paranormal all day.
Right. The devil made me do it.
The devil made me do it. There you go. Exactly. So that got me thinking. And then, so I just started collecting stories, and that led to the first Ghost Crimes book.
Awesome. So, do you want to go over a couple stories that are in the book, some of your favorites, give a kind of a little taste to the audience? And I'll definitely have a link for the book in today's program guide. And if you do buy the book, please rate and review the book. It helps these authors and it helps these books get seen more. The more you rate it, the more it populates and whatever you call it, the ads or whatever, it just populates. But yeah. So, okay. So you have a couple stories from the book. What's the first one you want to, I guess, get out there and let's dig it deep into this book?
Well, and I'll say before I share the story that when I collected the stories, my intention was to do more of a compilation book, really, and just say, these are the stories I've collected. But the responses and the effect that it had on these individuals, I said, I can't neglect that. And so I wove the stories into a narrative so the characters could show how these experiences were affecting them. And everybody had a bit of a different reaction. And I wanted to show that. So that's why I decided to put it in a narrative form as opposed to just a compilation. So one of the stories I got was paramedics responding, and they got a call that there was a deceased woman in her home. And when they showed up, the door was slightly open. And so they pushed it open, and there was a woman standing off to the left inside the house. And she had on a yellow robe, and she had short brown hair. And she just pointed to the stairs to the right. And so paramedics ran up the stairs and they found the deceased woman. And it was the woman in the yellow robe with the short brown hair. And and not to sound like a cheesy movie, but the call came from inside the house and there was nobody else living in the house. And it was interesting. So the response to that was that they didn't understand. They saw what they saw. They believed that the ghost of the woman was directing them to her body. They believed that, even though they couldn't prove it. It was just something they both experienced. But they really sat back and said, why would that happen? And their thought was that she wouldn't have been found for weeks. Apparently she was an introvert and didn't have visitors, didn't work from home or whatever the case was. And just, they didn't think she would have been found for, so now they were able to contact the family and she was able to be said goodbye to properly. And that was their takeaway. They felt like there was a divine intervention to help that happen.
Well, yeah, that's a really good life alert package. I mean,
right.
Before you get a button, well, hey, if you die, I'm just going to call 911 and tell my body's upstairs.
What do we call that? Ghost aid or ghost assistance or something? I don't know.
Yeah, right. It's like you see all those life alert commercials. Well, when you're dead, what do you do? Well, I guess you can call 911 and tell them there's a deceased body in the house.
Yeah.
Well, she's cleaning up after herself. You got to give her that, right? So.
But it was interesting. It really got me thinking. I had first of all, I'll say thank you for the picture you used in the promo, because that was when I turned 50, And that was 5 years ago. So thank you for the
Oh,
flattering old picture. I love that.
I post old pictures of myself all the time.
But I went and I'm at the age where I get colonoscopies now. So I had a colonoscopy and I came out of it. And as I was waking up, there was this beautiful nurse that I hadn't met yet. And she was shaking my hand and she said, "Gare, it's time to wake up." And I said, "Okay." And I looked at her and there was another nurse and she had one of those rolling um, desks with the laptop and she was inputting information. And she kind of just
Oh, yeah.
glanced back at me and she could see I was waking up. And she said, "Stephanie's going to take care of you now, but I just wanted to make sure you woke up okay." And I said, "Thank you." And she walked away. She was gorgeous, just this beautiful young nurse. And so Stephanie walked over and I said, "She was really nice." And she said, "Who?" And she wouldn't believe me that I had just been talking to um, a ghost, I guess. And she said, "Well," I said, I said, "Your name's Stephanie, right?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, if I was dreaming that, how would they know your name?" So that was sort of my proof that it actually happened. Of course, when I got back, all my friends were like, "Of course you saw a ghost." I'm like, "No, I really did. I saw
I had a colonoscopy and I did. I know. I've had colonoscopies myself, and I tell you, when you come out of that anesthesia, it is very it could have been very well like maybe you were partially dreaming, and it was kind of like your dream and the real world were coming together as you're waking up. Because I've had experiences like that with anesthesia where I've been talking, but I'm not awake.
Yeah, and of course, like I said, if she didn't know the name of the nurse that was coming over, that was the thing that clued. I was like, okay, I don't think that was a dream, but I do have. I mean, it very well could have been some sort of effect because years ago I had a hernia surgery, and I woke up on the table. Like yeah. Apparently, I have a very high tolerance for those things, and it goes out of my
Yeah.
system pretty quickly. So yeah, that was terrifying, but.
Oh my gosh. So the hospital ghost. Now, oh gosh, it's funny how when you look at the paranormal and how much the paranormal does still interfere with our side of things. Whether it's, in a hospital setting, a haunted jail. I mean, those seem to be very haunted all the time. And these high energy places. And with ghosts and, so if you have a prison and then you have ghosts in there, that's a very high I guess energy field or something that's going to give that juice. And hospitals are the same way. Dave had some experiences in the hospitals too after surgery and seeing dead people and ghosts. So it's very common, especially in a hospital setting. So what other is there any stories that involve kind of like the ghost kind of solves the crime itself?
So yes, kind of. So there was an interesting one where there was a nurse and she often worked the late shift and she started seeing a very tall man in the corridors, like just appear, and he would always disappear into a patient's room and go through the door. So she said, "Okay, I got a ghost. He's going through doors," and she would run into the patient's room and he would be gone. But what was interesting and a little disturbing was every time it happened, it would happen randomly, but when it did happen, the patient was in distress in some way. They were either coming out of a nightmare, or they just weren't doing well, and then some of them actually passed away shortly after. And so there was they were sort of like, it was a lot of end of life patient situations, and she didn't understand what was happening and started to think that this man or this ghost was actually causing these people to have problems and pass away. And so he sort of got labeled as the Grim Reaper or the Ghost Grim Reaper and things like that. Until one day, when she saw him standing there in the hallway again, and he actually pointed into the patient's room as opposed to going in. And so she ran in there, and then all of a sudden, all the alarms went off. The patient had gone into some sort of arrest, and they brought her back and out of it for a few minutes, but they weren't able to completely save her. But at the very last moment, she squeezed the nurse's hand, and she said, and she could tell the nurse was upset, and she said, "Don't worry, the man's here to help me cross over and go to heaven." And she pointed to an empty hallway, and so they started thinking about it, that the ghost was there when a patient was at end of life, and so he knew that they were be at the end of life and he was going to help him. So I guess the months went by and they talked about it a lot, And
Mhm.
she described the man, and somebody said, I know who that is. And it was a former janitor that had worked there, and he was going to school at night to work at the hospital and achieve some sort of medical degree to work at the hospital. Unfortunately, he
Yeah.
passed away in the hospital, on the hospital grounds. And so they thought that was him kind of fulfilling his dream, of helping patients.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a
That was a
sweet
feel good
story.
story.
I love feel good stories, especially when I'm also I can't imagine what my search history looks like on my computer, but I'm
Yeah.
always looking at these very dire, dark, crime, murder, all that. One thing I do, we're going to take a quick break. We have a coma patient story, but there's another question I do want to ask you too. So when we come back, we'll take care of that.
All right, folks. Summer is here, and the Paranormal 60 swag shop has all your supernatural summer must-haves. To comfortable, breathable tank tops for both men and women, to a paranormal investigator's must-have tool, a Bluetooth speaker for those EVP burst sessions that you want to do. Or you can hang out at a cemetery at night and rock out with the dead with some wicked, wicked tunes. And don't forget your Paranormal 60 sling bag, which you can carry all your summer stuff in while you're out and on the go. And don't forget our #1 seller, the travel mug. It's important to stay hydrated, especially in those dank and hot places y'all investigate, especially in the summer. All you got to do is go to paranormal60.com, click the swag shop tab at the top of the page, and then go to the Paranormal 60 collection, and that's where you'll find all your summer must-haves from the Paranormal 60 swag shop. And remember, kids, stay spooky.
Oh, my little darklings. Theater of the Mind, Tales from the Darkness is out, and it's available right now. And I would love for you to pick up a copy of my brand new book. You can get it on Amazon wherever you live in this great, big, wonderful world of ours. Or if you'd like to get an autographed copy and you live here in the United States, go to paranormal60.com. We have the standard copy, non-autographed, just $20. Signed copy, only $30. And not only do we have this book, but we have my other book, The Other Side. And right now I'm running a special. If you pick up both books, you can get both books for $40, both signed. Both will be shipped in one package for one price. So go check out all the information at paranormal60.com. The Other Side, a teen's guide to ghost hunting and the paranormal, which is a guide on ghost hunting and the paranormal. Or you can get Theater of the Mind, Tales from the Darkness, real life encounters with the supernatural. And not only are they some of my all-time favorite stories from you, but there's a few of my favorite stories that have happened to me in the book as well. So go check it out, paranormal60.com, to order your copies, or you can buy copies wherever you are in the world that are unsigned at amazon.com. And I'll ask you this. Many of you have supported me in buying this book already. If you could just take 30 seconds to rate and review this book on Goodreads or on amazon.com, I would greatly appreciate it, because the more we get of good ratings and reviews, the more they expose this book to a wider, bigger audience. So I would appreciate that as a personal favor to me, your pal, Dave Schrader.
And we're back. Okay, so Gare, before the break, we had the coma patient story, and you do have another story, and I do have a question for you that I would like to ask you. So what is the coma patient story?
So a man calls the police and said this is an intruder in his home, and he's home with his girlfriend. And the police show up, and there's a man that had just suddenly appeared in the home. They don't know how he got in, and he's in a hospital gown, and he's standing in the corner of the living room, and he's just crying. He's got his head down, so he doesn't seem violent, but obviously it's very disturbing that this man appeared in this couple's home. And the woman of the couple is just sort of staring, and she's not saying much, but she's clearly disturbed. And so the man points to the woman and says, "She killed me." And he says it over and over, "She killed me." And the woman's just staring and doesn't really know what to say, I guess, at this point. So the police get the man outside, and they put him in the back of the car, and they go back inside to check in on the couple, and they talk to him, and she says, "That was my ex-boyfriend." and he's been in a coma for several months, and he must have gotten out. And so they go back outside, and the man is gone from the back of the cruiser. He's just disappeared, and they have no idea. So they look for him, and they go to the local hospital, and they find out that he had been in a coma for several months, and he had passed away just a few hours prior to the event happening. So the police officer is like, okay, there's something more to this. So she goes back to the couple.
Right.
And so the woman finally admits that they had been in a bad car accident 3 months prior. And she lets him know, hey, he passed away. And so the guilt kind of overtakes her. And so she shares the story about the car accident, but then she goes into the actual version that she didn't tell before, which was she had been driving and she had been drinking and she hit a tree. He immediately was out and he ended up in a coma, and she called for help, and she put him as the driver so that she wouldn't get in trouble, and she walked away with scratches. And so it took a while, but yeah, she ended up killing him.
Oh, well, she didn't get away with that one, did she?
No.
I love it.
And again, the follow-up to that was that the family now was able to get some closure that, he wasn't driving, or it wasn't him that drove poorly or had been drinking, and, he was a victim. And so they were able to know the truth about, how their family member had passed.
And that's amazing. I mean, like, if you really think about it, I mean, even in the afterlife, you're still trying to do what's right, Hey, don't put me, even though I'm dead, I don't want to be charged with a DUI. My record's clean,
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing that she killed me. She killed me. Oh, wow. That is one crazy story. So the question I have is, has there been any cases where the actual ghost, phantom, spirit, whatever you want to call it, entity, committed the crime itself? Whether it's murder, pushing somebody down the stairs, have there been any cases like that?
There has, and there's one in particular that we're actually working on Ghost Crimes 4 now, and this story figures prominently. So I can't give away all the details of the specifics. Obviously, it's because I sort of let them unravel throughout the book, and to keep the reader enjoying it. But I will say that I've gotten several stories of ghost, and I don't want to say revenge, but I will say where they were protective of their former loved ones and came back in a situation where their loved one may have been in a difficult or dangerous situation, and things happened that resulted in somebody passing, and they very much thought that it was divine and support from the other side.
Yeah, and that was one thing I really loved about Dave's show, The Holzer Files. And a lot of these paranormal shows, when they go into these haunted places, the majority of them, a traumatic crime happened there. Somebody was shot or murdered, or somebody was, hacked up with a saw or something like that. And then crime and the paranormal collide more than people think it does, because when you look at the rich history of these locations, I mean, it's constant. You have people that were tortured or murdered or burned alive or in a fire and things like that. So when you see those crime elements and those paranormal elements come together, it makes a lot of sense. You know what I mean? Because if you think about it, everywhere you go, I mean, granted, a mental health hospital. I don't like calling them asylums. That just sounds wrong. But mental health, old mental health facilities. I mean, even though crimes aren't happening there, which they did, those people were treated so poorly. But you just see it all. It's all over. So it's kind of fun. And that's one thing I like about the paranormal. I love the rich history of it. So like when I'm watching paranormal shows or reading paranormal books, I'm focused on the history, the crime, the backstory. And then so when you bring it into the paranormal, where you're doing investigating and things like that, sometimes the truth is told at that time. Dave has even had that experience on the Holzer Files, where the ghost itself is writing history. how
Yeah.
it's supposed to be, how it really happened. So I think that's so cool when those two meet. So you got you now the book series Ghost Crimes. The first one was a compilation of people telling you stories. Now then the series of the books, it comes more in a more of a like a narrative, but it's based off of, people's experiences and true events. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the first book was based on the experience. It spans about 20 years, and it focuses on a particular detective who unfortunately just encountered these paranormal crimes, and
Mm-hmm.
he didn't believe in them. And so he was sort of forced through these horrific, and they're pretty horrific experiences,
Wow.
to believe in them. And he sort of partners up with another detective, and that's where he says, hey, there's always an explanation. He's sort of the pragmatic Scully, to his Mulder, so to speak.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they just sort of have to understand that these things have happened. And so the next two books, I took the characters and how they were affected, and they sort of become champions of solving paranormal crimes. And so they unofficially they go out there and help folks that are having issues. And you brought up paranormal crimes, and when you move into a new house and the owner is still there and doesn't want you there. I experienced that where the man had killed himself in the house that I bought, and I didn't know that. And in Florida, legally, you don't have to disclose that. And I had all kinds of crazy things happen. Now, I called them parlor tricks. He hid my keys and things like that, which was really annoying, but it was hardly a crime. It's hardly a crime, but I did hear of people where stoves were turned on in the middle of the night. The tires in the car go flat, and it's like that takes some juice to do those kinds of things. So
Right.
Yeah.
I tell spirits at my house, I tell them you turn off the lights, you don't blast the TV and things like that, because I'm like, you guys, if you're gonna be here and live rent free, you can clean up. So I totally get that.
There was one case where a candle had been knocked over that had been left on in another room, and a fire was started, and there was nobody in the room, and things like that. So it's obviously accidents happen and things happen, but when you have a haunting and there's something there and they're not happy you're there. I remember looking at a home that we were going to buy, and the owners had literally built the house and everything in it. It was a beautiful wood home. Everything was done, from them. But it wasn't my style, but I felt uncomfortable. Like they didn't really want me to buy it for whatever reason. And so anyway, that night I got up in the middle of the night and I was walking to the bathroom, and the towel that was on the counter just flew out in front of me, just flew out. And I just knew, and I said, I'm not buying your house. It's okay. You didn't have to follow me home, to like do that. So.
And there's actually a website called diedinhouse.com. What you could do is you can pay a service and they can tell you if anyone passed away on that property. And that way you can know if you're buying a haunted house or not, or was there a horrific crime there? Because I wouldn't want to buy a house that somebody like murdered their whole family in. I mean, that would be awful.
Yeah.
Awful.
Well, I bought the house in 99, and I had no idea that you could go on. And I didn't even think that, oh, maybe I should see if somebody died there. I didn't even think about that. But I will say it did give me one of my best-selling books called The Dead. It was based on those experiences. So I guess I have to thank them for selling me this house. I don't know.
Right? Thank you, spirits, for inspiring me to write books. You scared the crap out of me, but hey, I'm an author now. Yeah, I love it. Oh, thank you so much, Gare. You have a website, right? Is it just gareallen.com?
Yep. You can find me at gareallen.com. All of my books are available on amazon.com. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at author Gare Allen.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll have all those links in the episode guide along with your book, Ghost Stories. And please rate and review the book, people. It's very important. And Allen is Allen, not A-N. So it's GareAllen.com. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll definitely have to have you back on. Hey, when you get that fourth book, let's go for it. Because I want to hear a ghost actually committing the crime.
Nice.
I want to hear that. That would be awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining me with another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And I will see you guys next week.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.